Welcome back to another episode of the Hobby Barn Progress. Today, we're going to play with the excavator, my balance, and some sketchy choices, so let's get into it. First, I need to fill in some of the corner framing to finish tying the three walls together. There are two major challenges I need to overcome with this framing. First is working up in the air. Much of the previous efficiency of assembling on the ground is out the window now. Second, and more importantly, is working solo. Without the help of someone to hold pieces in place, being clever has to take over. In this case, I'm using some screws at my girt locations to support the 2x6, then nailing one side, going back and finishing the other. Periodically, I have to pull out some ratchet straps to pull things where I need them to be, or use some leverage to move boards around, and this is just the nature of working with wood. As pressure-treated wood dries and the forces of nature act on the assembly, sometimes you just need to remember to put the boards where they're supposed to be, not really where they want to be. Straight and square is still the goal, though. Finish up one corner, move on to the next, and now we inch closer to some increased sketchiness. The trusses arrive all bundled together. For this building, they're spaced 8 feet apart for a total of 6 trusses along the 40-foot dimension. The two end trusses are the same structural integrity as the middle trusses, but with some extra framing to attach siding later on. The excavator is a pretty nice reach of 19 feet. However, needing to lift the trusses a little higher than their normal resting height, and with the ground still being a little lower than final, I needed a little extra reach. Little backwoods engineering, some ratchet straps, and a 4x4 to use as a boom extension is clearly the best approach here. And while I wouldn't recommend anyone else do it, here we are. Each truss is only about 200 pounds, so for the 6 lifts I need to accomplish, this solution will suffice. And since there's nobody else around to drop anything on, I'm a little more accepting of the risk. I'm pre-marking the trusses for the roof framing locations before getting started on the lift. The first truss is attached to the outside of the building. There are some 2x6 blocks at the appropriate height to help support the truss while I line it up and nail it down. 4 20-penny ring shank nails on each end will hold it in place until I can get some more framing in, and from there, it's just a little bit of wiggling, climbing, and hammering. One question I'm asked with some regularity is where I learned how to do all of this. The truth is, none of it's rocket science, and just about anyone can figure out the assembly steps. The real challenge becomes getting good enough to make money at it, but since that's not my goal, this ends up just being a hobby and my version of a 3D jigsaw puzzle. With the uncertainty of this first truss dealt with, and some anxiety relieved, let's do another. Once again, I mark out where each piece of the roof framing will end up before lifting. With these 4 intermediate trusses, the connection to the column is a little different. In this case, the column has the top portion of the middle ply cut down to the nominal ceiling height. Then, I can just lower the truss down in between the ears of the post, and the truss is both captured by the post, but is also fully bearing down on the post. This eliminates some of the old school methods of quote-unquote hanging the truss. Where that method relied on bolts and extra support framing, this approach creates a direct load path from the roof to the column. The downside to this method is that the width of the slot in the post and the width of the truss are nearly identical, and getting the truss to sit all the way to the bottom of the cradle can be a little bit of a challenge. Luckily, we have mechanical advantage to help with that. A tow strap and an excavator can handle that little tug no sweat. The third truss continues just like the others. Hook it, mark it, lift it, place it, and climb around a bit. There are 2 options for next steps. I can immediately start framing the roof to make sure any lateral forces don't affect the building, or I can continue hanging trusses down to the end. Because this building is relatively small, at least as far as post framing is concerned, I'm opting for a mix. I put in a few of the roof purlins and some of the wind braces at the end of day 1 of trussing. The pace of solo work between the corner framing and trusses meant I was only able to get the first 3 trusses hung on day 1. Having never climbed on a post-frame truss before, it took me a while to get my footing and get over my small fears of falling. I'm only up 15 feet or so, but I'm fairly certain that wouldn't be a comfortable journey, at least not in the vertical direction. The purlins are 18-foot 2x4s being attached with 60-penny ring shank nails. If you've never seen a 60-penny nail before, it's actually better described as a spike, like the ones the carnival guys drive up their noses. And since it turns out driving that through the wider dimension of a 2x4 is pretty hard, I pre-drilled the 2x4s at the predetermined spacing to match up with the trusses. This pre-drilling also had the benefit of eliminating any splitting potential of my roof framing. The wind bracing was not immediately trivial how to install that, but as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you just need to be clever. I realized a small step ladder on the roof of the excavator put me at the perfect elevation to attach these wind ties. Now, while it may look a little bit sketchy, and really it is, I can promise you it's not as iffy as it first appears. The roof of the excavator is actually designed as rollover protection, so if it can support a 6-ton machine that rolled over, I'm pretty sure it can support me. And the size of that roof has at least a foot on each side of the ladder, so even if I slid a bit, it would be no big deal. Day 2 of trussing, I resumed first thing in the morning with trusses 4 and 5. And while it may not be as obvious in time-lapse, they did go a lot quicker. Apparently, I learned a thing or two on the first few, and I was able to apply that to the next ones. With 5 trusses down and only 1 left to hang, so far my sketchy boom extension seems to be holding up. But before I get around to putting up the final posts and hanging that last truss, I do want to spend a little time stiffening the roof. As I alluded to a moment ago, the first few purlins took some time to get comfortable with. I started by getting all of the 2x4s up onto the roof plane and starting to attach them, working my way higher and higher, aligning the pre-drilled holes with the marks on the trusses that I had made on the ground. A little pushing and pulling of the trusses with some ratchet straps, a few screws half-driven to support the end I'm not working on. More of the same assembly, really, just on the roof instead of the walls. The second side of purlins took a fraction of the time. I got my footing figured out, and fear gave way to focus. Now, since we've watched a couple days' worth of work in this episode, I'm going to stop it here and pick up next time with some perspective view of placing the purlins and get to the front-end framing and finishing this building out. If anything I've shown here has you wanting to know more, leave a comment so I know if I'm being too brief or just talking too much. I'm hoping to balance the length of these videos with your interest in watching them, or if you want to silently encourage me to keep putting these up, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons too.